This is Bonjour Hi, the Hillels are alive with the sound of David's wedding music edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Alana Zakon in Montreal and David Sklar in Calgary. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, Hillel Montreal says they're back, but for many their absence was problematic. We speak to students to find out the story of what they've been up to. But first, David, you got a wedding coming up.
I do. I think, 10 days from today?
You tell us.
You're asking us? Is it 10 days from now, David?
I have to check on Wedding Wire to see how many days. It counts down itself, so that's how I know it's exactly 10 days.
That's helpful. How you feeling?
Weddings are the bane of my existence.
It's a good thing, hopefully you only have one of them.
Hopefully.
Oh,
we
yeah,
hope.
Here, let's hopefully indeed. There's nothing more unenjoyable than prepping for a wedding.
I keep hearing that, I have to say, from a lot of people that I've seen get married recently, that it's a lot of stress. And I've been informed by many to have a small wedding when I get married one day.
I would encourage that. I would say just, go and get eloped somewhere down in Vegas, have a rabbi marry you down there rather than going through this whole rigmarole. And you know what? I partially blame Avi for this because I was in Montreal several weeks ago. And I went to get a suit at Simon's, and I thought, this is a lovely, lovely suit. And I showed a photo to Avi, and Avi said, no, you cannot get a wedding suit at Simon's. And he said, you have to go to Samuelson in Montreal. So I said, fine, I'm going to go to Samuelson. I did this whole other thing. It's a beautiful suit, mind you, but now it turns out John likes the first suit from Simon's, so we are now going to wear matching suits, nearly identical matching suits at the wedding. And we were even going to wear matching ties, but I put a stop to that. I said, we cannot have matching ties and matching suits at the same time. So we're going to try to tweak the tie business.
What's happening to the lovely Samuelson suit now?
I'm wearing it.
Oh, so he's also the same Samuelson
suit? He's going
suit?
to wear the original Simon suit, which just happens to look almost identical to the Samuelson suit.
Oh, he's wearing the suit you didn't
But
pick.
it'll look far less impressive next to the Samuelson suit.
This is why I decided to wear the Samuelson suit myself. It's a beautiful suit.
Avi just wants you to stand out. You have to take the glow. Send pics.
I think that the weddings have become overly complicated by wedding planners. I'm going to hear now from the wedding planner industrial complex. Anyways, I don't know. I think that things are complicated and they don't have to be. And I think that they should get married, have fun. I think you can plan a great wedding in 2 months or less, if you ask me.
I would really agree. I think less is more. We didn't have a wedding planner at all. I'm doing most of the cutting and the printing, and it's sort of landed on me to do all the prep work to get everything on time and arranged.
I have a crazy prep work story like that it was on my shoulders. One of the things that I was in charge of taking care of was the photography, because I care a lot about pictures and I care about photography. And so I was told that this guy is the best Jewish wedding photographer in the tri-state area, and I call this guy up, and we start talking. That's wonderful. Mazel tov. When's the wedding date? I gave him the date, June 18th, and he says, beautiful. And where will the kids be living? And I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, the bride and groom. Where are they going to be living after the wedding? I was like, I'm the groom, and what difference does it make where I'm going to be living?
It affects everything.
So he first tells me that I'm the first groom that he's ever spoken to. That it's the parents and usually the mother of the bride that takes care of everything, and it's really interesting and different that I'm the groom and I'm taking care of certain things. And then he tells me that the way he takes pictures or something is different depending on where they live, because if they live in Williamsburg, New York, which is really Hasidic, they might have certain types of pictures, where if they live in the Five Towns, which is very religious but also very, very wealthy, they have different styles of photos and whatever, and that alters the way that the wedding goes. And I was like, listen, dude, that's not our thing. Just come, take beautiful pictures, and give them to me, and we're done. Anyways, good luck on that. We are going to miss you next week. David's going to be deep in wedding preparations, and so he will not be with us next week. But good luck, Mazel Tov, on behalf of all of us, and we hope to see you on the other side once you are wed.
Hopefully I'll survive.
Hopefully. So we got to talk about this mural. This mural, Brouhaha Mishigas, that lasted all of 24 hours or so in Toronto. For those of you who don't know, there was a mural in a place called Tarragon Village, which I didn't even know existed in downtown Toronto. And we'll post a picture of it on the show page. And a Toronto City Councillor, Mr. Matlow, wrote on Twitter that one of the people in the mural was depicted in a way that, quote unquote, far too closely reflects hateful anti-Semitic tropes. And the mural was repainted within 24 hours, and it seems to have died down. I mean, there was people had complained about it. There was this and that. It was intense on Twitter for 24 hours, and that's it. David, first, can you give us a description of this mural?
I'm going to try. I think I've only taken one visual art class, so you're going to have to bear with me as I give this description. So, I mean, it looks like in the background it's a cityscape with some, reddish buildings, but right to my left is a black man who is basically sewing some garments, almost like the schmata business. Right to his immediate right, I think, is a woman in a wheelchair. Closer to the, right in front of us on the right-hand side, we have someone who could appear to be male or female, but with really like aqua or turquoise dyed hair. And then just in the background, and the real issue is this individual gentleman, a gentleman maybe in their 40s to 50s, slightly hunched over, possibly appears with a claw-like arm. I see a skull cap right over their head. And as they're lifting with their claw-like arm, it looks like they're trying to lift one of the buildings up and maybe kick out the tenants like an evil landlord. So this is what I see in this mural image. This is what's going on.
It could be just as much the opposite, right? This person is placing buildings down and letting residents have spaces to live in low-cost housing.
That was the only job he could find.
This is what's going on in my mind in the difference between tenants and landlords.
When I first saw this come up, I feel like I have like what's that group called? Everything Jewish Toronto, like trigger reaction where I'm like, oh, there they go again, just complaining about things and blowing things out of proportion. But upon reflection, I have a good analogy for this. It's something I've been thinking about recently. It has to do with the halacha of Shabbat. And how we're going into this. This is my analogy.
Avi's rubbing off on you.
Our early word of wisdom this week is brought to us by Alana Zakon.
Well, it was a topic that came up around my Shabbos table last week, around the certain halachot that exist merely so that other people don't misunderstand what you're doing. For example, why some people won't use an umbrella on Shabbat, or not even on Shabbat, but will not walk into, let's say, a McDonald's, even if they're just going to use the bathroom, because someone from the outside might look at them and be like, oh, I thought that person was religious, and then get a misinformed idea. And it made me think about, no matter what the intention of the artist or the people who produce this mural, someone walking by might just look at it and think, this looks like Nazi propaganda, or, oh, I've never met a Jew before, and that looks like what media told me. And have that, I don't know.
Okay, so let me know if you think this colors your perception, no pun intended, of the mural and its resulting brouhaha/mishigas. I don't know which one to use better than that. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but the person in question that was painted there is a real person. Not only that, but he was the landlord of the space in which the mural was painted on, and it is. Oh,
so I was right. The evil landlord.
Hold on. No. This person, a certain Mr. Werner, endorsed the mural enthusiastically, thought that it was a great representation of how Orthodox people have contributed to the multicultural landscape of Toronto. And on top of that, that is actually what he looks like.
Fair.
So,
how did he react to all the people saying this looks like Nazi propaganda?
I don't know. I did not ask him.
Okay.
Whatever. But to me, what's going on here, right? So anything that looks remotely Jewish, but veers in, how do we decide this is too Jewish looking versus not Jewish looking enough? I was like, what happens in real life now, right? Because this is where my mind goes, right? So if somebody looks too Jewish or looks like a caricature of a something anti-Semitic, and he happens to be born looking like that, do we say, listen, Marat Ayin, which is the principle that Alana was talking about things which appear whatever, we don't want you to be walking down the street and Jews might think that you, or non-Jews might think, oh my God, this is anti-Semitism, right? This is what Jews look like and they're horrible, and he'll never be able to pick up a $20 bill that he dropped on the street because it'll look like he's grabbing his claw and grabbing all the money off from the world, right? Do we say that this person maybe have to have plastic surgery? I don't think that we say that. People look like people, and And we have to sort of accept that that's what it is. Do we have stereotypes about the black individual that looked too African American or too African Canadian, as the case may be? Do we say that this is not fair, that this person looks like this, and this is an anti-black stereotype, that he is, working and hunched over a sewing machine or something like that? What's going on here?
Well, this just made me think about the new Borat movie, which I have not seen, but I listened to Unorthodox talk about it, and they went into great detail about the scene and played a clip where he dresses as like a very caricature propaganda looking Jew and goes up to like these two old ladies. And it just made me think about that. I don't know if either of you saw the Borat movie.
By new, you mean a year and a half old or 2 years old?
Yeah, like the most recent one. Not new as in came out today, Avi.
Okay. I was like, wait, what? There's a new movie?
But I feel like, just to add to the discussion, what do you think about something like that, where he went and put on that whole look, which maybe some people actually look like that? Probably not, from what I heard. It sounds like he really went into the grotesque. But is that something that we should be saying is totally okay?
I mean, Sacha Baron Cohen can do no wrong by me. I've loved everything he's done since the early days of Ali G. And if we're going to talk about this mural, I think the problem is, so people got offended, and then all of a sudden, they changed it. So now what does it look like right now? It's a young man, it's a teenager with no Jewish visibility at all. I mean, that's almost like you can't win in this case, right? There's just a total erasure of Jewish culture. You tried with the Jew, he looked too Jewy, and now all of a sudden it's just a random teenage boy. Can we ever win?
I think that this is the problem with the outrage cycle. Of like people needing to find something to be mad about all the time and looking for hatred where hatred might not actually exist.
Amen.
Okay, well, enough of this mural. I'm not outraged. I'm only outraged at the outrage. And let's move on to our main topic.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in watches and custom designed jewelry along with a curated selection of designer jewelry. Visit us online or in person and Eric Goldberg will help make your jewelry dreams come true. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour High listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
On July 7th, Hillel Montreal made a story from their Instagram account that said, "Please share this post and let everyone know that we're back." While this was in reference to the Instagram account itself, it echoed something I had been looking into, the disappearance of Hillel from campus life in Montreal. I've been speaking to current and former students as well as former staff members who have been telling me that Hillel Montreal has been operating as a shadow of its former self. Since becoming absorbed into Federation CJA as part of GenMTL in 2016, Hillel went from being a non-stop action hub on campus with programs running every single night to having students quitting Hillel committees in frustration because they couldn't get on a budget approved for something as simple as a lunch and learn. Staff had to split their time between Federation CJA's West End campus and the downtown Hillel building, which meant students saw less and less of them. Eventually, there were fewer and fewer staff members at all, which meant the students themselves were shouldering more of the burden. As I heard from one international student, out-of-town students were very involved with Hillel because it was their Jewish community, but that Federation's priorities were to retain Montrealers, so if you weren't a Montrealer, you weren't a priority. The other thing I kept hearing was that Hillel essentially had become a place for Israel activism, to the exclusion of everything else. Now let me be clear, countering hate on campus is a very important part of contemporary Jewish student life, but it shouldn't come at the expense of everything else. And what happens when much of your Israel activism is funded by right-wing sources, such as the Maccabee Task Force, which was started by Sheldon Adelson? I kept hearing that if you didn't buy into this form of Israel activism, there was no longer a place for you at Hillel. If Hillel is back, then we felt it was important for people to know what it was back from, and hopefully to spur them to be better than before. But enough from me. Earlier this week, I had a chance to speak with 3 students. Avishai Infeld, a 4th-year student in political science and Jewish studies, Roe Wine going into his 5th year studying software engineering, and David Mickelson going into his 4th year in political science and marketing. Let's hear what they have to say. So I'm here with Avishai Infeld, Roe Wine, and David Mickelson. Avishai Infeld is originally from Vancouver. He's going into his 4th year in political science and Jewish studies. Roe is originally from Edmonton. He is studying software engineering. He's going into his 5th year, and he joins us actually from Tel Aviv right now. And David Mickelson is also from Vancouver. He's going into his 4th year in political science and marketing. Avishai, Roe, David, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you for having us.
So I'd been sort of following this story off and on passively for the past little while. I'm a former Hillel person from 20 years ago. You know, I'm an old man right now, but back in the day, I was really involved in Hillel. I was always on Stanley at Hillel House, and you know, I started hearing reports that Hillel wasn't what it used to be, especially once the shift happened towards centralizing Hillel into GenMTL and making it part of Federation. And, you know, a couple weeks ago, I think it was, or last week, I saw a Instagram story about how Hillel is back. And that's really what spurred me to try to get this all together and go what happened. If Hillel is back, it means that it went away at some point. And that's really the story that I'm trying to follow here. You guys have experiences. Avishai, why don't you tell us of what it means for Hillel to have not been around for the past little while?
Sure. So I think, especially over the past few years, every organization in any doing all sorts of things, whether it's Jewish life on campus or really many different, different areas, has had a hard time doing all sorts of things for obvious reasons. With the pandemic, it's been very hard to do things in person, which especially for university students, you can't really have a very full university experience online. It doesn't work so well. Though I think with Hillel, people have felt that there just hasn't been as much going on. The quality, or maybe not the quality, but the amount of especially Jewish life related things has just not been at what it should be.
What do you guys have experiences? Have you heard from other Hillels what you expect to see from your average well-rounded Hillel? What types of programs do you think average Hillels run, and where do you think Hillel Montreal might have been, or Hillel McGill, Hillel Concordia? Where do you think that may have not reached to that expectation? Are there any examples that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of other Hillels, I think they have a much more well-rounded program happening. They serve their students in a wider variety of ways, and they're generally the dominant Jewish group on campus.
Mm-hmm.
They're considered the major player. They also have a very generally a more pluralistic outlook. Yes, not the Hillel Montreal is not pluralistic, but just because they're a bigger entity with a bigger footprint, they're able to offer their programming and things going on to a greater variety of students looking for different things.
If I asked you, Roe or David, what the average Hillel program looked like over the past year, right? How many programs were they running? What type of year did they have? Can you think of some examples of events that they ran and events that you wish that they had run, but you didn't necessarily see on the program?
Yeah, so I can answer at least for part of that. A lot of events that they had were Shabbat related. So sometimes they would have Shabbat dinner. Sometimes they'd have a Havdalah. I personally joined a lot of the Havdalahs more recently, and they were very nice. There were also some Israel events to promote maybe the Laila Levan or something like that were also somewhat regular, or maybe there was a holiday of some sort. Those were sort of the main events that at least that I attended and I was aware of. And I think that they were becoming more consistent, I guess, especially in the last year. But I think COVID definitely disrupted kind of the consistency of those sort of events. So I was in my first and second year when COVID hit in my second year. And I think in my first and second year, I came to what I knew about. It was always a nice opportunity to go to see friends. So there were times when I would go and I'd hear about all the different programs. I actually attended a program recently. It just finished, or it was related to Hillel, called Onwards. And so I would hear about those sort of programs, and I know my older brother was also attending those Hillel events with me from McGill, and so I went a little bit before. I don't think I went very regularly. I know that they did have some more regular programming. That was something that I started doing more recently this year.
If is it what you would have imagined Hillel to have had for a well-rounded Hillel, or do you think that Hillel should have been doing much more programming, should have been doing more well-rounded programming, or were you actually overall like satisfied with what Hillel had offered over the past few years?
I think I was pretty satisfied. It was a little like, the reason I use like inconsistent is because it was hard to say like how many people would show up. It wasn't like there was a program every week. It was sort of like every once in a while I'd hear about something that was happening, and then I would go, and it was nice. I do think that they had a decent variety, so I don't know if you could say it wasn't very well rounded. I think it was pretty well rounded. Um, but yeah, I think it wasn't the kind of thing that I like scheduled into my week and would go on this day at this time, like, so that's why it was sort of more in the back of my mind. And like, yeah, I think that's kind of what I understood from like my brother and other university students that were already going to McGill, that's sort of how it was.
Yeah. David, what was your experience like over the past little while at Hillel?
Sure. So I will say I guess I'm the kind of the voice of the outsider looking in this conversation. Just because my real only involvement with Hillel was the program that Roy was on over the summer onward that I did in 2021, and then from there, my friend said, "Oh, there's a Jewish Life Committee. You could sit on it. Could be fun." So I went to that. There was a Thanksgiving, like Thanksgiving Hanukkah event that I went to. That was pretty fun. But I think like the two issues that Abishai and Roy brought up respectively I would say would be pluralism and kind of acceptance of multiple different Jewish segments, I guess, and consistency. So I think like I'll touch on the consistency because the pluralism element I think is a bit more difficult. But I remember like when I was on the committee, someone mentioned that Shabbat dinners like for the because ostensibly Chabad is Chabad. There was a family that did Shabbat dinners for the kind of more modern Jews, or I forget the name, Reform Judaism. They kind of had their own stream, so it was really like Hillel was kind of the conservative stream. So but in terms of Shabbat, like most people would kind of already go to Chabad or this other thing. So someone mentioned Havdalah for Hillel to kind of do a Havdalah every week or something, and that was kind of met with a bit of pushback almost weirdly, just in terms of like organizationally, that it was too difficult or something. People were mentioning
it was too difficult to organize a Havdalah every week.
Yeah, so I think that would definitely have been a great opportunity, and then from there there was Consistency Cafe Ivrit, where people would kind of sit and speak with Hebrew speakers, and there were a bunch of great programs, I guess, that Hillel kind of acted as an entranceway into like the high fellowship, which I did, and onward. But I think the pluralistic element, which Abishai mentioned, which I think is super interesting, is that Hillel is kind of interestingly, I feel like at a lot of other universities, more of an umbrella organization to kind of bring in all Jews on campus, whereas at McGill, at least I can't speak on Concordia, but at McGill, it's very much kind of like almost like an Israel on campus with extra steps, in that a lot of the events I noticed were like Israel oriented, kind of Zionism oriented, et cetera, when during there was a referendum, a BDS referendum at the school, and the kind of Hillel took the lead on that. But I think that in a way, like almost the focus towards Israel kind of excludes a lot of people who maybe have differing views on the conflict. There aren't really enough then religious elements to get in the people who are kind of more religious. There aren't really enough or like, for example, another event was suggested, a movie night, and a Jewish movie night. You mentioned before that like Jewish studies, poli-sci, marketing, are all basically the same thing. But another thing that is basically the same thing as Jewish studies would be kind of like movies and music. And there's so much great Jewish culture that's been released, especially in North America. And instead of saying, oh, well, let's watch Fiddler on the Roof, a great movie night that surely would have gotten a lot of people involved, or let's watch, the Barbra Streisand or something like Funny Girl or something like get
Yentl,
people
any
yeah.
sort of film with Jewish content.
It was like, oh, let's watch an Israeli film. Let's push for an Israeli film, which, not dissing Israeli cinema, but I feel like you definitely would have gotten a lot more interest if you would have focused on like North American Jewish films. So I feel like there's a weird almost like there has to be some element of Israel or Zionism in every single event, which I feel like precludes it from being accepted by most of the vast majority of the McGill Jewish community. Or whereas on the other hand, something I noticed about Chabad is a lot of my friends who would be kind of stand on a different side for the conflict will go to Chabad because it's open not only to Jewish students or to Chabad Jewish students, but it's open also to non-Jewish students, and there's a lot more of a community feel there, which is difficult to which is I think able to exist because there's a focus on the religious element, on the community element, on the kind of spirituality element, on the sitting down, eating dinner, making friends, hanging out with people fostering a sense of, oh, this is my friend, this is my friend. Whereas at Hillel, it's a lot more like, well, here's this friend who's a really big supporter of Israel. Here's this person who's a really big supporter of Israel. And it's like Israel on everything, So I feel like by making that the focus, you're excluding a lot of people from joining in and from non-Jews as well from participating, which I know is a big thing at the University of Ottawa. A lot of non-Jews like to participate in Hillel. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I got friends. They're doing a great job, but I feel like that might be kind of limiting the scope almost, as it were.
So the sense that I'm getting is you can be religiously pluralistic, meaning you can be Orthodox and you can be Reform, and nobody will go to you and say, well, you don't belong at Hillel if you don't keep Shabbat, right? Or you don't belong at Hillel if, kosher is not a thing for you. But if you don't have a specific view on Israel, you don't really feel welcome at Hillel anymore. And that actually turns off a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's not really, and it's a pretty dogmatic view as well, I would say.
One of the things that I heard about when I was doing a lot of pre-interviews, I did a lot of talking to students and former staff off the record for this whole story. And I kept hearing this Maccabee task force. Have you guys heard of this thing at all? Avishai, you're nodding your head a little bit. Tell us, what do you know about Maccabee Task Force and how it relates to Hillel?
Sure. Maccabee Task Force is a Jewish organization connected to Israel advocacy, and they provide funding for Hillels in general. That's where a lot of their funding goes towards, is Hillel. But generally, the funding that comes from Maccabee Task Force has to be connected to Israel in some way because that's the organization's mission. That's their funding priority.
But not just Israel, it's, very specific, the way that David was talking about, a very specific form of pro-Israel advocacy, right? It was a program that was funded initially by Sheldon Adelson, and it has a fairly right-wing stance on Israel, and so you can get a whole bunch of funding for your Hillel, provided you use that funding for very right-wing Israel advocacy.
Right, so I'm not sure exactly of their specific agenda, and I don't think that my understanding.
Well, I'll call them on it. You don't have to.
I'll obviously know Sheldon Adelson, and his what he funds, what he did fund, I should say, what now his estate, I imagine, is funding. But in regards specifically to Maccabee Task Force, I don't know precisely what their agenda is, so I couldn't comment on exactly how that's being directed.
Sure, but one could imagine, and I can ask all of you guys, if Hillel was getting a lot of funds from Maccabee Task Force, you would inevitably likely end up seeing the result of this being very Israel-oriented, pro-Israel oriented programming. Not to say that people on the left are not pro-Israel, but in a very right-wing direction, that this would color the nature of Hillel. And there is a public record about Hillel Montreal having received some significant funds from the Maccabee Task Force. So it's possible. I mean, I'm not going to entirely speculate. I don't know exactly, but there could be a correlation between what David is saying and what Maccabee Task Force is providing to Hillel Montreal.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details about the finances, but for sure, if money is coming from Maccabee Task Force, then there will almost certainly be some sort of association between the use of those funds and promoting Israel. Not that, and again, just to clarify, I don't think promoting Israel is a bad thing, not at all, but that those funds would be used for that.
One of the things that I had heard about that was that if you had an Israel program, there was always funding available, whether it's through GenMTL, through Maccabee Task Force or things like that, or through CJA. And yet, if you wanted to do like a Shabbat dinner or any other sort of program, you'd be told, well, we have to run it through Federation because it's all centralized now, and it would take a very long time. It would be very difficult to get the funds, or we would not get the funds at all to begin with.
So marketing is another example of something over the past few years that's certainly been difficult, though I'm very happy to say I think that's an area where we have made a lot of improvement. Like with many things still working on it, but absolutely, I think we're certainly going in the right direction, and it's definitely easier to market things and get the word out more quickly and in a more efficient way.
So none of you were around for the transition in 2017, right? To Hillel. Have you heard anything about that transition from the way things were before and the way things were since, from previous students or not? No.
The transition to Federation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I've heard about in the past. I've heard a bit about the transition and a bit about why it occurred. I honestly don't remember everything. It's been a while since I was telling you more about it. But
don't worry about it.
It is quite an interesting model. I'll say I don't know of any other Hillel in the world that's under a federation in the way that Hillel Montreal is. Perhaps there is one. I don't know of it. Generally, my understanding is that Hillels, like most Jewish organizations in North America, whether it's a synagogue, schools, Jewish family services, any social organizations, all things like that, they'll receive money from Federation. They're a beneficiary. Either general operating grants or grants that are directed towards specific programs, but they're not directly a part of Federation. Federation usually is just a funder to Jewish organizations.
One of the other things that I find that's unique to Hillel Montreal, and from what I've heard, again, from other people that I'd spoken to and from knowing many, many other Hillels and having been around and worked at Hillels and been at Hillel Montreal in the past, is that there hasn't really been a Jewish educator on staff for a very long time. Is there any experience that you have about that like somebody actually, a professional Jew, a rabbi, somebody who's around as an educator? Do you think that, that's the fact on the ground, that is the case? Has that affected, Rowie, do you know, how has that affected Jewish life on campus when you don't have a campus rabbi of any denomination?
So there are staff that are generally dedicated to programming and running programming, so that does exist, and even on a campus level. It is hard, I think, particularly with an organization like Hillel, to retain staff. So there's turnover, and that could be a reason that maybe students aren't always so familiar with the staff. But there are staff who do work with that.
So what you're saying is that there's part of the issue here is that it's very difficult to have staff retention, and therefore students don't get to know a lot of the staff as a result of that.
Right, that could be part of the reason. Also, of course, again, I think we're a unique group, almost the entire student body at this point, in that we have not had a normal experience. Even this past year was much more normal than the past year and a half before that, but we still are not interacting with other students, with other people, staff, with whoever it may be, in the same way that we would have seen before this time period, and hopefully again going forward into the future. So that also could be a reason that maybe people wouldn't be as familiar with the staff, just the opportunities weren't there. But yeah, and then and as I said, staff retention, I'm not sure if that's a problem that's particularly pronounced with Hillel Montreal. I think it's also something that you just see in general at Hillels, because that's the nature of that type of organization, certainly in the lower level positions at Hillel.
Yeah, so what would be the wish list that you would have, and what would it be like for you to say that this is a great Hillel, this is a Hillel that I feel welcome to, this is when Hillel is saying over the course of this coming summer and this coming fall, we are back and we're better than ever? What would a great Hillel look like? What would be that wish list where you would say, yes, they clearly have done an about face, and I'm glad to see where they're at? Well,
yeah, I think it's definitely hard to have like a consistent, like Jewish, I keep using the word consistent because it's like, I just compare this to like what Chabad is like. Chabad has a rabbi and a rebbitzin, and every week they have the same, dinner, and then they have a Shabbat prayers the next day, and it's like it's gonna happen, but there's no one who's like yeah, there's no one who's like organized.
And as a student, your life is around consistency, right? It's classes are the same time every week, the same thing. You want that.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's much harder to organize um, something like that that's gonna be have a good turnout and everything when there's no one who's really assigned to it directly. So I don't know exactly like who um, runs all the programs and who's in charge of everything, but uh, it it seems like overall, not just in like the Jewish sense, but there's no one who's like that's their job and like that's what they do like every week. This is what they work on. Like yeah, there's the like student councils, but they're students. They're busy. They have other things to do, and so.
So what you're saying is that there's not even I was speaking specifically to like religious life, but you're talking even about programming life. So there's not even a professional program staff on campus or even off campus to do the programming consistently every week.
I know there are definitely people who are at a higher level in Hillel. I don't know. Abishai can definitely jump in here because he was more, um, you know, connected with like the board and.
Well, it would be fair to say that if you're a student and you don't know who the programming staff is, then that's just as much a problem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I guess like I knew who like the Hillel Concordia president was, Hillel Miguel president was, and like those were students, and they did a good job of organizing different programs and like, that was great and all, but some places like Chabad they had a president as well, and then they also in addition to that they had the rabbi and the rebbitzin. And they were that was what they were in charge of, like that was their job. So not having that in Hillel, and I have met people who were I think they're involved in the federation, and sometimes they would come to events. I didn't fully know what their position was, but I just didn't see it as like the same thing. So that's sort of what the difference was for me, a big difference at least.
I would say in general, things related to Jewish life. I've actually been the VP Jewish life for the past year, so perhaps a little bit of this is on me as well. Maybe I could have done more too. But I think, yeah, just like a more well-rounded Jewish life for provided for the students, especially maybe more around holidays. Particularly around Shabbat, of course. So something, as you really mentioned, that we started doing this year actually was doing Havdalah, trying to make it consistent so we could get get people to know this is happening every other week or whatever it was going to be. Something that we started achieving, and so that's something they started working on. But really, yeah, more around Jewish life. So like as I said, more Shabbat dinners would really be great, and then not just Shabbat dinners, but also beforehand. Kabbalah Shabbat, I think we're when we do it, even which is not so often, but we're the only Jewish group at the moment that I know of providing like a full egalitarian Kabbalah Shabbat, or really davening of any sort at McGill, with any sort, even if it's at this point not so regular happening at all at McGill. I think that's something that's really important that we should try to make happen more often. As we were talking before, bigger Hillels, you often see there will be like Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Minyan or Kabbalah Shabbat or whatever, and to get there, someday that would be amazing. But who knows if we even have the right amount of people for that? And small steps.
If I may editorialize to that, I mean, if at this point we can say Chabad is taking care of the Orthodox students on campus, and not to say that we're going to give up, but if you're going to devote your energy, work on it for a group that isn't necessarily being represented, and that would be liberal Judaism, right? Egalitarian Judaism, Reform Judaism. I understand that, I mean, this is actually something that I heard from a while ago from multiple people, that Am McGill, which is another Jewish student group, had been formed because Hillel wasn't doing anything for them as liberal Jews, and they decided to go and just form their own group. So what you would like to see is more well-rounded and religious life.
Yeah, exactly. I really would. I do think that we're working towards making it happen. I don't know what the next year will look like, what the next years will look like, but definitely something that we're communicating to the Hillel staff and Federation staff, and I think we're getting somewhere with that, and hopefully, that will happen this year. Another thing, if it's already, I just want to mention this. because this is something that I would love to share with everyone who's listening to this. This is not connected to Hillel, but just talking about what we can see for Jewish life in McGill. A few years ago, a friend and I, along with the Chabad rabbi and Rebbetzin, started the first ever kosher meal plan at McGill, and we were also working with the executive chef. Unfortunately, this was right at the beginning of COVID. Started right before, actually. We had it up for 2 weeks, and then we all left for COVID, and it basically collapsed. And we've been trying for like the past, seriously trying, I guess, again to revive it for the past year. Very little luck, and we thought we were getting somewhere, and then we weren't, and then it keeps seeming like we're gonna get somewhere, and then we're not. So this is another really great initiative that's helping Jewish students at McGill. So again, if anyone is listening to this, and you have some connections or have some in with McGill, please let them know that the Jewish students need kosher food, and we're having a very hard time getting through. So please mention.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was a student, the turn of the millennium, I was a student at Concordia from 98 to 02, and the Hillel on Stanley had a kosher meal plan run out of the cafe/restaurant that was there, and there were residents that lived there, and but you didn't have to be part of that residence in order to be part of the meal plan, and they had a cafe, and Hillel definitely had that for quite a while.
So the way the our meal plan works is it's actually through McGill. You use the money that you've already paid, that you have to, the mandatory meal plan.
Yeah, exactly the same sort of idea.
Yeah, but the food is, you pick up and eat the food in RBC, which is the biggest McGill cafeteria. You eat with your friends. You are not eating kosher food, which is the great part about it. And again, we're really hoping.
Well, you're eating kosher food, but you're just not eating it only at the kosher space.
Exactly, you're eating kosher food alongside your friends or whoever,
being social with everybody
who are eating the regular food. And it was a really great program, great thing we had going. We're really struggling to get it going again, unfortunately. So that's another priority for this year.
Do you think a Jewish educator, having a rabbi on campus, would be a priority? I know Avishai it's a leading question for you because you're the son of a rabbi, but I imagine that's probably on your wish list as well, to have a Jewish educator or a rabbi on campus of any denomination.
Totally. And again, that's another thing you see the Hillels, it's a pretty common Hillel position, Jewish educator. And I certainly think that can make a very positive impact.
Excellent. Well, David, you're going to wrap things up for us. What's on your wish list for Jewish life to make Hillel turn around?
I wrote 3 things that I think would be massive to helping Hillel succeed. I think number 1 is a greater sense of identity, because right now I think you got Israel on campus for Israel. You got Chabad for the religious aspects, and even you were mentioning Orthodox. Like, I mean, I'm a conservative Jew. Abishai's dad is my rabbi. I'm a conservative Jew. I know a lot of conservative Jews, a lot of Reform Jews, a lot of even non-Jews who go to Chabad for like the Jewish religious experience. I think Hillel, if they carved out a niche as the cultural experience with hints of both, as you were saying, I mean, boom, immediately that's a reason to go on campus. Like, the one event that I was really sad about that I couldn't go to was there was an open mic. And I mean, what did Jews do better than comedy, than like music and whatever? And those kind of events are the kind of events that like would get me excited to go to a Hillel event, the cultural, the almost ethnic aspects of it. So that's number 1, is a sense of identity. Number 2 is in its current form. I mean, we can talk all we want about how it's difficult with them connected to CJA and whatever, but being able to, like, I did a high fellowship, and it was pretty cool to do. There were a lot of cool connections that arose out of that. And I think just you're connected to this huge federation, you're connected to all these other organizations. Hillel should be advertising these programs and getting people involved through Hillel by proxy by saying, well, listen, if you come with us, like, there's this CJA event that's happening, we can get you into. There's this Federation event that's happening. There's this cool thing that's happening, that cool thing that's happening, and use its connections to advertise the Montreal Jewish community. Because as it stands, it's centralized. Like, there isn't like McGill and Concordia Hillel are the same thing right now. Basically, like, all the events are McGill plus Concordia, really. I mean, so use that centralized network to reach out almost like a spider. What are all the cool things happening in Montreal? Is there something happening in Hochelaga? Is there like a Leonard Cohen festival, whatever? The third thing I think is, and this is why, I mean, I could be better at going to these Jewish events myself. I will acknowledge that, but a friendly face, because when you go to Chabad, I mean, even if you're sitting by yourself and you don't know anyone at your table, first of all, you'll always know someone at your table. But even if you don't know someone at your table, there's someone to talk to. There's a conversation happening. You walk in, you talk to Shmuley for a bit, and it's a lovely conversation.
Shmuley is Rabbi Weiss, the rabbi at the McGill Hillel.
He's
and his
fantastic.
Wife, Rashi.
At the barbecue I went to, there were people to talk to, but it wasn't as much of a natural conversation. There was kind of, because there were so many people like from Concordia, from McGill, from this walk of life, from that walk of life. There wasn't really a lot of conversation. And if I'm allowed to just say, John Levine used to work for Hillel, and he was such a good friendly face. Like you walked in, he'd come up to you immediately. You feel like you're at home, like you're talking to someone. He's since moved on to other things, but having someone like that is so good. I mean, Avishai, a very friendly face. Avia, who is also on that committee, a very friendly face. One of my good friends. I've got a few friends now who are on the executive bench. They were all very friendly. But like there isn't. But despite that, when you walk in, you're kind of struck by, is this house haunted? What's happening in this house?
You're mentioning the students, right? The students are friendly faces, but there's no staff. There's no people that are consistently there that their job is to be their friendly face the way that you have at Chabad.
Yeah, there's no warmth.
Is what you're saying.
You kind of walk in and it's like an industrial thing, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll go in here, maybe I'll go in there. Like, where are the people?
Well, this has been really enlightening. Thank you all for coming on. And maybe we'll have you on in a little bit to see how this transition has shifted, if Hillel is actually following through and where things are going, or if there's any other student stories that are on, we'd love to have you back on. So Avishai, David, Roi, thank you for coming on Bonjour Chai.
Thank you. Can I add one more thing? That's all right?
Please, go ahead.
I just want to say as well that I think Chabad as well is a great organization. They do great stuff. They've been, huge in my time in McGill. Of course, as a Jewish student, I don't know what I would do without them. Honestly, they do so much, and I don't wish to take away from them at all. So I think we've got thousands of Jewish students in McGill, and ideally, I would love to see both Hillel and Chabad,
of course, as
two very strong Jewish organizations doing what they both do best. So that is definitely what I would like to see.
This is not a zero-sum game. It's not one group has to win for the other group to lose. We want that ecosystem that is diverse. We want Chabad, we want Hillel, we want McGill, we want the Ghetto Shul, which, by the way, I was one of the founders of in the early years. I was there the first year and for the first several years of that. We want all those places because, the more groups you have, the more robust programming, the more life you have on campus, and everything's going to rise as a result of that. So it's not to the negation of other groups, but Hillel being the international organization for Jewish students shouldn't be in a place where they're dropping the ball, is what it sounds like from our end. So again, Avishai, David, Roi, thank you all for coming, and come on again anytime.
Thank you.
So what do you guys think?
I think the question that just jumped out to me is, I didn't even know there were non-Jews who wanted to be a part of either Hillel or Chabad. Who are these folks?
I've heard really weird stories about this from people I know that went to Hillel in Montreal, and people who would just show up and they were like, kind of like how people say they're Anglophiles when they like England. They were kind of like Jewophiles, and they just show up and they sit there. I heard, which sounded weird to me, and I've heard some people who are from other ethnic minority groups who didn't really have necessarily a place that they felt they could meet up with their friends, and they liked getting like the free meal, and they would just show up and they were like, everyone's so nice to me. I think it's bizarre, but I've never witnessed it. Avi, what do you know of this?
I have never either. When I was a student, I did not see any of that as firsthand. This was not part of the experience of being at Hillel or being around Chabad around then. And I have heard this from other students as well. I didn't go into this point because it seemed a little bizarre and not super relevant to what we were talking about. But yeah, I think that is a little strange. That I'm not opposed to Hillel offering a free meal or Chabad offering a free meal every once in a while to like somebody who might need a meal or somebody who is a Judeophile in some way or another. But there was something a little strange about that part of it. Yeah, I don't know. David, what was your experience as a student on campus in general?
I mean, as a Jewish student, I tried to stay far away from anything Jewish as possible when I was at Concordia in the aughts, in the 2008 to 2011 era at Concordia. I didn't want to. After spending 11 years in a Jewish institution, I wanted to get as far away as possible. So I divorced myself from all that. I didn't know what Hillel was up to. I never cared to know. And I think only in later life do you want to embrace these things. So I just think it's like this cool factor that Jewish kids probably want to stay away from anything organizational Jewish.
Well, it depends on what kind of person you are. I feel, I don't know if it's the same for you because you and I are both in the same field. But for me, I didn't go to university, but there was a Hillel on campus at John Abbott College where I went to CJA. First of all, I was way too busy with theater school. It's extremely intensive. So I didn't really have time for anything other than my studies. But even if I had, I also felt kind of similarly where I had been in this bubble for so long and I really wanted to meet people from other cultures and kind of felt turned off by like the mainstream like style of Jewish organization. So to me, actually, the people that were cool in high school were going to things like that and were very involved. And the people who were like now what might be considered cool because apparently being nerdy or artsy is like hip now.
So wait, you're calling yourself cool right now, Alana?
Sure, let's go for it. No, but I think that there was, the perception of what was cool in high school is really different now that I'm in a different community. And I agree with you that now I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I'd gone to university because I could have made, all these connections that would be maybe become like my lifelong friends. And I have to find that in my own way now. I feel like I missed out on something big.
So you talked about connections, and I'm just wondering, do you think that's like the motivation for a lot of these young Jews, rather than getting into the religious aspect, the spiritual, the community building? Do you think some of these kids are thinking, hey, this is a great way as a stepping stone to build portfolios and meet people in my fellow community?
I think it's everything. I think that's the beauty of a well-functioning Hillel community on a campus anywhere in North America, is that however you want to plug into your Judaism, you will find something at Hillel. If your Judaism is Israel activism, you will find Israel activism. If your Judaism is purely spiritual and religious, you will find access to kosher food and services of whatever denomination you want to be part of. If your Hillel is purely like networking, you're going to go and find the other business students and commerce students to go and network with. And if your Hillel is purely just social and making new friends and finding somebody to date that's Jewish, or not, as the case may be, apparently, there should be a place for you at Hillel for any of those spaces. And to me, that's the biggest shame, was that when I was at Hillel, I was at Concordia. I was president of Concordia Hillel. There was a lot of politics on campus. I was very involved at Dawson at Hillel. I was very involved at Concordia. And as they had said before, Hillel, Concordia, and McGill were fairly close and unified together, even though we had separate constitution, charters, whatever you want to call it. We were separate organizations, even though we were under the umbrella of Hillel. We all felt close together, and it was vibrant. It was really a place where you can go and just hang out for the afternoon. You would see people, you would meet people, you had networking opportunities, you had social opportunities, you had Shabbat opportunities, you had Israel opportunities, and everything was there for us. And it was really a cornerstone of my Jewish student life, or of my student life in general. Remember that for me, coming from a very religious high school, going to Hillel was actually meeting new cultures, right? It was different in that sense. And like, I have to say that coming back to Montreal 9 years ago, one of the things that I noticed was, and we all know this, that Montreal is filled with people who are best friends since elementary school, and nobody needs necessarily like new friends. And my friends from high school were all like from yeshiva, were all elsewhere for the most part, and we're different communities, and we were not really in the same social circles. And I ended up really reconnecting with a lot of people that I knew from university, right, from my Hillel life, because those were people that I knew from before, and I didn't have the high school friends to rely on to recreate that social circle. So there is a lot of value to the social aspect of Hillel. There's a lot of value to all the other pieces. It's a lot of who I am as a Jew, what is because of Hillel, because I would meet people who were conservative, and they were observantly conservative, and I would say to myself, well, I can't say that this person is bad, because they're well-intentioned. And orthodoxy that I had grown up in was basically saying, if you don't believe in what we believe in, then you're wrong. And I was like, these people can't be wrong. And that really shaped a lot of my pluralism as a Jew.
Right. That's what really stood out to me from the interview, was the pluralism comment that one of the guys made about that was what was lacking on campus with Hillel. So as someone who worked for Hillel and listening to this, what do you think the solution is?
Well, I never worked for Hillel. I was never an employee of Hillel. I was a student leader, but
okay. I don't know the distinction since I wasn't involved
meaning
in
there's
any of
student
this.
leaders and then there's professionals. To me,
Gotcha.
it sounds like there's, and again, it could be no fault of Hillel's own, but there's a budget crisis. Seems like they don't have money to like do stuff. I'm purely speculating here, or I'm hearing little bits and pieces from some of my pre-reporting. Because like I said, I did extensive reporting for this before I had these students on that led me to think that this is actually a valuable story.
Is it a COVID budget?
No, I
problem?
think that there was
Or
like
just
pre, and I think that COVID is not an excuse either. And I know we didn't talk too much about COVID, in the interviews, but school went on. The students got to know who their teachers were. To say to themselves that for 2 years Hillel was absent because of COVID is not an excuse to me. When budget should be nothing, buy a professional Zoom account and then Hillel can do cool stuff for 2 years. If you're technically a student at McGill, come meet other students, do stuff, right? People were creative with Zoom, especially in the first year when Zoom was a novel thing. Stuff was happening. And for Hillel to drop the ball in this way, I think is egregious. And I think that I really hope that they are building back better, to borrow a term from our neighbors to the south.
So I'll just jump in because I think one other thing that stood out for me was sort of the division and the silo nature of Hillel is over here and Chabad is over here, and you've got the other different organizations. And I'm just wondering if they were brought under one group, if that would attract people who are of different religious backgrounds, people who have different political persuasions. If it's one organization operating all of these things, would that help or would it hinder what people want to achieve and what people get benefit from these organizations?
I don't know. I like the guarded nature where there's a whole bunch of different organizations that are aware of each other and sometimes work together, but don't always, because if you bring them all together, then you're centralizing, and then you start having issues of who's in charge and what's this and what's our message. And I like the fact that Chabad has a certain message and Hillel has a certain message and McGill has a certain message and Ghetto Shul has a certain message, or they have a new name for that. I don't even remember. But anyways, I like that idea that those different organizations are there. I just think that even within Hillel, you need that pluralism, you need that multiplicity of voices that you want to talk about within that central Hillel organization. If Hillel is strong in every other place in North America because of what you're saying, David, then let the other organizations grow and be their thing, and within Hillel have that pluralism.
There just might not be enough room. There might just not be enough students, and I just worry that it becomes saturated one day. I think over here where I live, where you've got the reform movement and the conservative movement with the young initiative, and everyone is trying to lure and get these young groups organized together, but then it becomes the same. And I just think we need a bit more unity under one house.
Sure, but we're not talking about Calgary here, where there's really very few Jews, right? We're talking about Montreal, where there are a lot of Jewish students on campus. There are a lot of international people that come to McGill. And for those people to know that there's everything but Hillel seems a little strange to me.
Fair.
But yes, I do think that people should be playing nicely together. So we should make sure to note that we did reach out to Hillel for this episode, and while they were unable to comment in time for this week's show, they did promise to follow up for a future episode. So we hope to hear back from Hillel about what we've been talking about. We would also love to hear what you think, of course, and you can email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca to let us know your thoughts. Now it's the time in our show where we talk about our nachas of the week, that thing that made us feel good and Jewish over the past week or so. David, what's your nachas this week?
This is coming hot off the press from the Alberta Jewish News. My nachas goes to Duncan Taylor and his father. And I think I need to back up a little bit first. So there's a mountain right on the BC-Alberta border named in honor of Henri-Philippe Pétain. And to people who know Pétain, he was a hero in World War I, but he also teamed up with the Vichy Nazi government in France in World War II. And after the war, Pétain was convicted of treason and found partially responsible for the murder of 76,000 Jews. So Duncan Taylor pushed to get the mountain renamed in honor of his late father, who would take him on hikes to this particular trail. And in 2020, the BC Geographical Society received a request from this concerned citizen to rescind the name of Mount Pétain, Pétain Creek, and Pétain Glacier. The vote finally went through. It was changed with the vote of 11-4, but one of the no votes, a council person, said that renaming the landmark would be a victory for cancel culture and destroying history. And this is what this individual counselor said. You take the name away from the mountain, and in like 10 years, they won't know he was a bad guy. I personally think that you take the name away from the mountain, and it won't be named after a literal freaking Nazi.
I agree.
Amen.
Alana, what's your nachas this week?
So, changing gears, it seems like every time David has a nachas that's like really intense and serious, mine's like really superfluous. I just finished watching the new season of Stranger Things, and I wanted to shout out our producer Michael Freeman's article in the CJN from 2016 about what makes Stranger Things so Jewish, because it really is. Not only just the cast and the producers, but certain themes, and I very much enjoyed this season. Check it out if you haven't already. It's a great show, and you can find it on Netflix.
Excellent. Is Stranger Things, should that be my summer binge? Is that it? I haven't watched a single episode.
Yes. Do it.
Done. Okay, well, for my nachas, I'm going to hand over the reins for this week to Nadiva Feingold, who's going to share with us her nachas for this week.
So my nachas for this week, or probably like the past 2 weeks, is it's about this really amazing book that I love from PJ Arwe called Roller Coaster Grandma by Dr. Ruth K. Westmere, is that how I say it? Westheimer, and Pierre A. Lehu. And it's about how her life, about when she was in the war, moving to Israel. And I love how it goes back and forth of she's taking her grandchildren to I think it was an amusement park, and she says, oh, that's not that scary. I got through much scarier things in my life. And it goes like flashbacks. And I think it's really amazing to see what she would do to get like an education and how she could do all this stuff. And at just the height of 4'7", when I am also very short. And I think it's a great book, and you should definitely try and check it out. And it is amazing, great read, and I definitely recommend it. And also shout out to my Abba for turning 45 tomorrow.
Happy birthday, almost.
Happy birthday, Avi. Nadiva, wait, I want to know, do you like roller coasters? Do you ride them?
I think they're a little too scary for me. I think I'm gonna have to wait till I'm a little older to not chicken out when I'm literally just about to go on them to go, because I'm too scared right now.
Fair enough.
I get you. I was the same way.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week of July 22nd, Shabbat Parashat Pinchas. Our producer is Michael Freeman. Technical production is by Andre Goulet. Our music is by So Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our new page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like Bonjour Chai, please help us to grow the Frozen Chosen community by telling a friend about us and getting them to subscribe. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Sklar.
Can we do a bit at the end where David makes up the song?
This is our closing music, David.
Oh, shit. Here we go.
Do it.
The hills are alive.
No, the Hillels.
Oh, Hillels. Sorry, my fault. Bad. The Hillels are alive with the sound of David's wedding music, a sound they have sung for 1,000 years. Hopefully it will last that long, John.
Mazel tov.